Great Tuesday. Welcome to the King Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I want to start this show off with a quote. We do not become leaders in spite of our scars. We become leaders because of them. And this is a quote by today's guest, Douglas Smith, who's the author of The Path of Rocks and Thorns. So today we're going to walk into a man who's journeyed through the fire, whose leadership was not built in boardrooms, but forged in solitude, pain, and deep reflection. Douglas Smith, author of The Path of Rocks and Thorns, Leadership Lessons from a Prison Cell, brings us a story that is both harrowing and holy. His life is of living testimony that even in the most unlikely places, cells, courtrooms, and rehab centers, leaders are being formed. As we explore what it truly means to be fully human, I invite you to breathe deep, slow down, and receive the wisdom of a man who descended into darkness and chose to rise with purpose. Let's begin. Welcome to the King Connections podcast, Doug. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for this invitation, and what a beautiful introduction. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to have you on the show. Appreciate it. But before we get started, I always like to begin each show with asking, what's your spiritual energy number kind of right now in the moment? Between 0, life sucks, to 10 being life is awesome. What would you say would be?
Well, I did meditate this morning, so I'm probably at about 7. I would be at 10, but there's a lot going on today. I get to have a great conversation with you. My book's coming out today, so lots of nerves. So I'm just, we'll continue to strive for that flow state.
Excellent. I'm glad you identified as a flow state. Lets me know that as an author, you understand the importance of getting into a flow state in order to really get a book done and really be at your best, so to speak, while you're writing the book as well. Not just get it done, but really be at your best. Thank you for answering the question. I'm a 10. And the reason I asked that question for our listening audience who may be their first time hearing the show is because what I've learned over the years from doing a podcast show, or when I had live events that I would do when I'm speaking to an audience, or just anytime I'm having a meeting of any kind of communication which is required between more than 2 people, the question is so important because what it takes into consideration of what people bring energy-wise to that meeting. It could have got cut off in traffic. They could have just found out their bank account is frozen. They could have a spouse that's sick. That you never know before they walk into that meeting what they dealt with and what energy they bring into the meeting. And without asking that question and just going straight to the meeting, a person can be disengaged if they're 5 below. They're not going to be present. They're going to be thinking about her in the meeting quickly. They got other things in their mind, and it's best to reschedule the meeting. And they're going to be antagonistic depending if they're 2 or 3 in that space. So when people say they're 7 or above, they're usually going to be leaned in. They're going to be present. They're going to be open to a wonderful conversation, and that's really what the purpose of the question is. So thank you for answering that question.
Beautiful. Love it.
And
yeah, I find that like when I'm working with folks, they're always kind of looking for, they want to be a 10. And so like they'll use a coaching session with me to get to a 10. But, I think that people just want to feel sort of peace inside. They want to feel comfortable in the flow, but part of it is really engaging with what's coming up for you. Right, to actually experience your emotions, not call it bad, good. So if you've got anxiety or nerves or stress or whatever, to just fully feel that and notice it. Don't get caught up in the thoughts that are associated with that, but just kind of like ride it and notice yourself, and that can be a really spiritual activity, just tuning in inside. Right, and not getting frustrated that you're not sitting on some sort of mountaintop levitating on the ledge.
Absolutely. I think those wonderful words of advice and preparation, which brings me to my first question. How would you introduce yourself as, if this was which is not, well, it's not really our first meeting, but this is really our first meeting, and I had no idea of who you were. We were not introduced or connected, but we just happened to run into each other at a restaurant, at a bar, what have you, how would you introduce yourself to the?
Hmm. Oh gosh, at a restaurant bar. Well, I think sort of first and foremost, I'm a social worker. It was what I dreamed to be. I never had a hero until I met a social worker.
Mm,
I am an advocate for uh, keeping people with mental illness out of the criminal justice system. I am a practitioner of yoga, prayer, um, and connection. I am a dad and husband and uh, pack leader of 3 rescue pups.
how long have you had the pups?
Oh gosh, our oldest is heading up on 8 or 9. You lose track over time, and
Also, it's
they're
been
all.
three different in your lifetime that you've.
Yeah, well, we have 3 right now, so each one individually is a beautiful, wonderful dog. All 3 together, it's like Cerubus, the devil dog of hell. But but they're wonderful pups.
What any particular breed, or are they all mixed breed?
All mixed breed. Yeah, like we've done DNA on a couple of them, and it's like 10 different breeds, all sort of brought together in its own sort of alchemy.
Mm. Now,
Yes.
as a social worker, you know, your business is listening to other people's problems and being empathetic and emotionally intelligent and not biased and those things. And with that in mind, my next question is, what do you have typically as your most dominating thought to help you prepare to step into that role, from transition from
Hmm.
dad to writer to now I'm going to be a social worker?
Yeah, I mean, boy, I really love that question. I think stepping into identity is really transformative. I think, as I've grown older, one of the ways in which I've sort of transcended my own personal doubts about being a leader and an investor in other people is to recognize who I am and what my role is. And, I sort of realized, I'm older, more experienced than the people I'm working with. And I can play mentor role. I can play, um, a pivotal role in people's lives. And that's more important to me than my own career success. I've always said, like, if you're concentrated on investing in others, your time, your talents, your coaching, if you're interested in other people's success, your own success just sort of emerges naturally.
Hmm, absolutely. I would concur with that. And what would you say is the most rewarding aspect of being a social worker for you?
Oh God, it was you know, in addition to I'm also a coach and a leadership trainer, but it all goes back to social work. It's that deep, deep sense of commitment um, to people who might not have the advantages, who might be held back by mental illness, poverty, racism. It's just a deep, deep commitment. I may have forgotten your question, but I remember the first social worker I ever met, who I had just a wonderful relationship with. She was running a homeless shelter, and every one of her conversations was deep, rich, and spiritual. Like, even working with people who might have gotten on the other side of the rules and guidelines, she would always take a breath and say everything from a place of love, irrespective of how that's going to land with them. Say it from a place of love. And I think being connected again to identity, your values, um, you don't necessarily have to get caught up in your fear of how people are going to respond and things like that. If you're connected to your values and your sense of identity, everything sort of flows naturally.
I concur with 100% when you say that statement. And I believe how important identity plays in determining our perspective, first of all. And second of all, our willingness and our openness to truly communicate, as we say, communicate. And let me expand on what I mean by that even more. I think that one of the biggest issues that we have in the world right now is because we live under the false narrative of believing that our identity is tied to either our race, our gender, our sexual orientation, our career, um, our country of origin, our political party, right? And what we don't take into consideration is that most of those, or all of those I just identified, are someone else's made up identity to say this is what this identity or group of people or a tribe, so to speak, I call it forced tribalization. This tribe behaves, and this is where what these are the characteristics and traits of this particular tribe. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's true, it's just that someone came up with that. And when you choose identity, then you're saying, I accept those traits to define who I am. So if I'm a black man, then I'm going to take on all the identity traits that the world has of that, what people assume to be the trauma and past of those things, and more importantly, the victimization of those things. So now that I'm forced to see you, if I choose identity, I'm going to see you by your race as well. That's my chosen identity marker, is my race. That I'm going to see you by your race. I'm going to see you by your gender. And that automatically separates us. That tells me that we're different. And I'm going to hold you, whether I do it consciously or not, I'm going to hold you accountable to every other person of your race and gender that I've ever experienced until you prove otherwise. So you're going to be so guilty or prejudged, until you've proven otherwise. So I think everybody, when you live your life through the lens of racial identity, you're going to be prejudiced. I don't think you can, unless you've grown up around other races, but if you haven't, it's going to be natural to prejudge. Now, racism and prejudice is two different things. So now, with that being said, and then you corrected me earlier, and I appreciate that. You said you're also a coach and a leadership, certified leadership leader, trainer. And so now, with our identity now being the central focus of our conversation, this question, how would you define the other roles? That you talk about social worker, but how would you define yourself as a coach, and then now sum up that as a societal identity?
Beautiful. I love that. There's such a rich question, and it's so multifaceted, right? I think one thing that I've had to reckon with is that whatever my sense of what my identity is, that when I walk into a room, that people have perspectives on me of how I look, how I land with them. I'm aware that, being a bald, strikingly handsome 56-year-old white guy, that when I walk into a room, when I'm assertive in my advocacy, when I lead with directness, right, that is going to land a particular way with people, and I recognize that. And so being really curious about how you're landing without defense, I just found instrumental. In fact, when the way that I land has come across as, what are the terms people used? White privilege, patriarchal, things like that, right? That it's just a curiosity about how I am landing with them. And it's a real curiosity about the lens through which they see the world. Where we want where I would love to see people go when we're as a leadership trainer and coach is to maybe take a step beyond the label and also get really curious about how they're landing, right? Irrespective of what their identity is. How is it that you're being received? Because we want to, what did you call it? Communicate with people, which means being effective with people. And so that starts with being responsible for how you are landing with people. So if you want to be an effective leader, then you have to recognize that your leadership, every action, every word you don't speak, your demeanor, all of that has an impact on other people. Right? And as a leadership trainer, you want people to just be effective. And so it's kind of a rich experience of gaining feedback, self-reflection, to understand like I have an effect on people, even if I'm not, even if for them it's just hitting triggers like, ooh, this person reminds me of X, right? Just being willing to be curious about that and um, without defense. I write in the book, in prison, I had to reckon with race. And, prior to that, I went through the School of Social Work at the University of Texas at Austin. Black people are highly underrepresented at the University of Texas. That's still true. And that was particularly true in the School of Social Work. So here you've got a bunch of people who are white who may not share life experiences of the people that they're intending to serve, right? So they bring that perspective in the world and can't quite understand why they're not effective outside of their own racial group. And so in prison, I had to sort of reckon with that. The racial representation, if you will, is entirely reversed. So Black people in Texas represent about 12% of the population, yet 33% of the prison population. And so I created friends, I created mentors, I leaned into the possibility of like doing Bible studies with people, being part of the choir and drama team. It got me into full engagement with people. And one of the things I realized was that I've had a lifelong discomfort around anyone who's not white. And I was really shocked and surprised by that. I'm like, I'm a social worker. How's that coming up for me? And I thoroughly rejected the white supremacists in prison, even to my own physical detriment. And I got jumped one time. But that discomfort was there. And I found that the only thing that I can do if I was really going to communicate, if I was going to share love and connection with people, is that I had to cross a bridge of discomfort with that. And I realized that was the same in my career. If I wanted to be effective as a coach or leadership training or working with people lived experience of incarceration, mental illness, substance use, and so on, I had to be willing to be uncomfortable. And I would say like some of the worst mistakes I've ever made in leadership and in advocacy center around race. It's the way in which I resisted accusation, perspective of other people, right? And I've had to learn that if I want to be effective, if I want to communicate with people, I have to be willing to be uncomfortable, non-judgmental, non-defensive, and seek that connection. I'm not even sure if I'm answering your question anymore.
Well, no, you are, and that's such a rich answer and it's such layered with so many other elements there. Like, for example, I'm curious to know what is your background prior to going to prison to put you in the mindset that you had to think that way.
Hmm.
Because it'd have been so much easier, and you even spoke to your own. You said I chose to be more open minded and more inclusive, even to my own detriment. So for you to
Yes.
even put yourself at physical peril, knowing that you're violating prison rules, so to speak, with that racial structure. I'm just curious to know what was the background to kind of position yourself that I'm going to stay true to this, even at my own peril.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I I could give you my whole life story, but I will tell you I didn't know who I was or what it is that I wanted to be until I met a social worker. I worked at the homeless shelter. I worked as a suicide hotline counselor because I personally have had experience with mental illness, suicidal ideation, psychiatric hospitalization. So, I was just drawn into this profession. And as I went through school, I realized that I was actually really interested in um, systemic failings in our society, right? Like, how how homelessness rises with every $100 increase in average rents and home mortgage costs. Homelessness rises 15%. Right? And I was really interested in that and how that decimates communities of support and things. So I was really drawn to that. I was the type of guy who in semester breaks I might travel, and I'm wanting to go visit really innovative homeless service programs and things like that. So it's just like on fire. And I worked at the Texas legislature working on um, programs related to children's health, workforce development, disability policy, social safety net.
So
That was
this is
really who
all
I
prior to
was.
going.
This
This
was it. And like I said, I also had I had a mental health diagnosis. I had a lifelong struggle with depression, mental illness, some bipolar episodes of real mania. I had struggled with that, and in my 30s, it really got out of control, and I started losing jobs. I went deeper and deeper, and I ultimately went out onto the streets, and I found street drugs, specifically crack cocaine. And I think I was about 37 years old, and in the 2.5 years after trying crack cocaine, I was I was in the back of an ambulance 6 times, admitted to ICU 3 times. I went to 3 psychiatric hospitals, rehabs. I lost my marriage. I lost more jobs and the right to be with my child without adult supervision. That's what happened. And I was in county jail on my 40th birthday after committing 4 counts of robbery and heading towards prison for a 15-year sentence. And I served 6 years of that, and then the rest of the time on parole. So that was what was it. That was my background prior to prison. So of course, in prison, I was, clearly not using drugs. I wasn't looking for alcohol or anything like that. I was learning to live in my own skin again. But I did find that my values were still quite strong. I even had recurring dreams of going to social work conferences and in my prison whites and hiding behind potted plants to be able to sort of feel that energy. So my values as a social worker were still there even after all of the drug use and criminal misdeeds. I still was called to that profession. So of course, when I connected with or when I noticed white supremacist uh, actions I couldn't be a part of it, and I ultimately got on the wrong side of one individual and was assaulted. Um, I was put into seg for about 3 days while they got that person off the unit, and I never had another problem with that. But I thoroughly rejected what they say shooting bolts, like the Aryan handshake and things like that. Just thoroughly rejected it. I thought that they were kind of idiots and was not going to go along with that. And I wanted to have a full, rich experience as much as I could of connection with people when I was in prison. I know that sounds strange, but I wanted to connect with people.
Doesn't sound strange to me, but I'm sure it sounds strange to people who are used to people talking about going to prison and having that kind of perspective. But to me, I think that's what really makes you fully human is
Yes.
everything you just described, your complete journey and then your commitment to your principles and choosing to be principle centered in those circumstances instead of circumstantial driven or centered, where the
Yes.
circumstances determine how you're going to respond in this particular situation. It would have been so much easier and expected for you to allow yourself to be circumstantial driven because people will say, okay, I'm in prison. This is what I have to do. This is what's required. This is the way. And you chose, to me, that's really the ultimate measure of freedom. When you go
That's where I
against
found it.
societal norms and say, I know that this is what I'm supposed to do, but this is what I'm going to do. And I have the freedom to make that decision. I think that's such a powerful testament and says a lot about who you are as an individual.
Yeah. I had to also, you say fully human, and I was fully human, meaning I also had to reckon with the ways in which I had destroyed my own integrity. Even before the drug use, I was destroying my integrity, right, with actions and decisions that were not aligned with my values. And in prison I had to reckon with that. I had to recognize that it wasn't just the robbery and that was fueled by drug use and mental illness. Those were not the exclusive reasons why I went into prison. There were a myriad of other factors, like the ways that I lied, I stole, I took shortcuts. I did all of those things. And in my book, I structure the entire book like Dante's Inferno. I don't know if you've ever read that, but
I played the
it's
video
just
game, but
I
I've
didn't
seen the
know there was a
movie.
video.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah. Well, it's the whole idea is that, Dante was a 13th century poet and political activist who was exiled from his hometown of Florence, and he wrote Dante's Inferno about a journey through hell. He did it in that epic poetry style, and it, and the metaphor was that he could not go up, right? There was no way back to where he lived and where he was in his past, so his only choice was to go to the deepest core of hell, and it was only there that he was able to climb again. And that's the metaphor of the book, is that you just have to go through it to the other side. And so each chapter has sort of a sin, a level of hell that it was greed, lust, gluttony, what have you. And I describe, reckoning with that in some sort of way. The turning points I had in prison, where I did the work around that, and what the opposite expression is of that. So, for instance, reckoning with my own greed and theft, I realized that my true mission, like the other expression of greed, is to invest in other people, to give people your time and attention and care without consideration for your own gain. that's the opposite expression of greed. And I do that in each chapter, right, to find the more pure expression of each level of hell.
Yeah, you know, as you talk about that, and you say these chapters named after a certain level of hell that's referring to Dante's Inferno, I think that's a great way of kind of describing your journey and kind of what you've gone through. I definitely want to explore more of your book and kind of where you are now. But we're going to take a break for our sponsor, but we'll pick it back up on this on the other side. So
Sounds good.
take a break for our sponsor.
The playbook for growing a local business online is simple. Capture new leads, conversationally convert those leads into sales, turn those customers into positive reviews, and then reactivate those customers into repeat buyers. And that's exactly what our platform does. In order to consistently generate new leads, you first need to be found. The quickest way to get search engines like Google to put your business at the top of search results is by having a steady flow of positive reviews. With our platform, you can show up in search and stand apart from your local competition by easily collecting new customer reviews through text. But getting found is only the beginning. Most consumers choose the first business that responds to them. So unless you start conversations with potential customers almost instantly, they'll go somewhere else. That's why we make starting conversations with website visitors as easy as clicking a button, connecting you instantly through text message so the conversation doesn't end when they leave your website. And we bring all your leads, no matter where they come from, into a single conversation stream that supports text, email, video messaging, Google Business Chats, and even Facebook and Instagram DMs, so you can respond faster and more efficiently than ever. When it comes to turning all those conversations into customers, we make collecting payments just another convenient part of the combo, so you get paid faster no matter how they prefer to pay. Next, you'll want to turn your new customers into happy reviews, which is a snap with our new review request quick actions. The more conversations and customers you generate, the easier it becomes to drive repeat business. We make reactivating contacts into customers as easy as, yup, you guessed it, the push of a button. With bulk actions, you can send out text and email campaigns to generate new sales whenever you have a new update, promotion, or story to tell. We make modern online marketing simple. Let's start growing your business today.
And welcome back to the King Connections podcast. I'm your host, King. I'm here today with Doug Smith, author of the book, The Path of Rocks and Thorns. Now, Doug, let me ask you this about your book, because I find the subject of your book to be very fascinating and your life journey as well. But you describe your journey through the path of rocks and thorns, the descent into darkness that ultimately led to transformation. How would you define fully human leadership based on what you lived through?
I think it's fully human leadership is, I think it's recognizing your divinity, that for me, it wasn't being born I was not born to go to prison. There were things that happened. It's recognizing that that you're never actually at that point of perfection, that it is a journey, no matter how far, like no matter where you are in your life, that there's still going to be things that crop up and you have to sort of grow through. So, going through prison was a chance for me to, I think the freedom I found there was that all of those demons that I was dealing with prior to prison, in prison, there was no way that I could hide from them. I couldn't numb them with alcohol or drugs. I had to actually experience them and reckon with who I was. And So yeah, so for me, being fully human is that willingness to take the journey, and with honesty, with no judgment for yourself, with integrity and accountability. Yeah, that's what it means to be fully human. And there's always room to grow. I still have moments where, even when I was writing the book, where it was devastatingly traumatic to write it, I would actually read portions of the book and I would feel nauseous and my whole body just shook. And it took me a full day to move through it. And it was because it was traumas from the past had not let go. And I realized just the process of writing it was helping me to reckon with those demons. So yeah, I would think being fully human is taking the journey.
Absolutely. As you talk about your book and my understanding of your book, it's unflinchingly honest. In a culture obsessed with image, what gave you the courage to lead with such raw vulnerability?
Because shame can't survive the light. Right. That's it. And so that's the main reason, right? I'm going to be unflinchingly honest. It's funny because I don't even think of it that way. I just am saying something that's true. But you're right. I'm just used to being out there in public. I was a criminal justice reform advocate for 6 years following prison. And I used my story, my honesty, my vulnerability when I was speaking before legislators. And I found that they were instantly drawn to that vulnerability. They found it to be credible and they were more likely to embrace what I had to share. So I think that's one thing, is that shame can't survive the light. And if you're hiding, the things that you're hiding are probably going to come out anyway in some type of way. So I might as well just be open about things and no longer try to hide. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's it. There's one other really important reason, and that is because people who have criminal records, who have had addictions, who have experienced trauma or mental illness, they experience untold levels of stigma throughout their lives. And it inhibits their chances of finding jobs, of getting promoted. And there's just so much stigma. They hide from it, and it just perpetuates shame. So, I want to lead the way. I'm going to be honest about my experience. You know, I'm going to defiantly stand against stigma and say my story boldly so that you can feel comfortable in your own skin and maybe one day tell your story.
You're absolutely right. And as you talked about stigma, and to be honest, I wrestled with that in my mind today when you were talking, because I think it's a very important way people frame themselves in the very beginning of a introduction. So, in other words, what I mean by that when I talk about stigma, if you led with "I'm a former crack addict," and then got into everything else about your life and your journey, that's what's going to frame you in my mind. I'm going to associate you with everything I know about crack addicts. I'm pretty much going to miss most of the transformation part because I'm judging you based off what you the stigma. But when you talk about the way you did introduce yourself, and then you mentioned through that journey that you were addicted to crack, the stigma is not there. I'm not judging you through that lens at that point. I've accepted you for what you've done, and now that's just a mistake you made along your journey. So it's interesting how a person will lead with that, who they are, and the stigma is there. And I had to mention that because I wrestle now with that in my mind. I didn't even realize consciously that I thought that way, but I realized as you were talking, I flipped it and I said, wow, that would be totally different with how I judge him. Even though I try not to judge people, I believe in judging behaviors, not people, because behaviors can be changed, right? So now, with that being said, I just wanted to state that, 'cause I thought that was interesting. You talked about the importance of stigma. My next question for you is, for those still caught in the cycle of shame, addiction, or incarceration, what signs do you look for someone that is ready to lead? How do you find someone who's in those situations to say, I see a potential leader in that individual?
That I actually have a really specific answer to that. So when I have leadership cohorts, so I have leadership cohorts in about 5 different states, and when we're doing the selection, I'm looking for coachability. I'm looking for a willingness to accept feedback, an awareness that you have results, that you create results and impact in the world, and that can be for good or for damage, and that you're willing to look at that, to take coaching and feedback, to grow through a process of self-reflection. I'm looking for self-reflective leaders who understand that they have power to create change, or they have the power to create damage in the world. So that's what I'm looking for. I invariably can tell when someone is going to continue to struggle or even go back to prison. I can just tell it. They're blaming someone else for it. They're not being responsible for their part of it, right? And when you give them feedback, they get defensive. I just know it. If you've been to prison before and you're caught in that, you're going back, or you're going to stay internally incarcerated.
You know, you just brought up an interesting question to me. I've seen a lot of different YouTube channels dedicated to or hosted by folks who are returning citizens, and I see that channels are pretty much growing, because a lot of the topics that's in around is, you know, violence in prison, rape in prison, how to survive, how to make sure those things don't happen to you. And I've seen at least about maybe 10 or 15 different channels. And again, I never searched for it. I guess, you know, the algorithm figured out I'd be interested in that. So with that being said, my question for you now is, how therapeutic do you believe that someone who's a returning citizen and creating a YouTube channel and then talking about sharing these stories, talking about these incidents that happen in their lives can be for them as far as growing?
That's beautiful. So having gone through that type of dark experience and coming out on the other side and sharing your story, inviting others to tell their story, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Actually, yeah. Oh my God. You know, and it's so empowered, right? Like I'm reclaiming my own power, my story. I'm inviting others to do the same. Storytelling is probably one of the most healing practices that I can imagine, right? It's because, you know, people are longing for stories. You communicate your values, you communicate, there's so much you communicate in your stories, and what they're looking for is that you've been on a journey, you've made mistakes, you've struggled, you've made key decisions in your life that shifted the way your relationship to the world. And then they're looking for, okay, so what's the result of that decision? And that's called the hero's journey. And so when I train storytelling, that's the model that I use. And that's what you're doing with this podcast, is you're inviting people to share their stories. And how could I ask, how is that for you in terms of your own healing and growth to ask people to share their stories?
Actually, it's transformational for myself. It helps me grow as an individual. It helps me realize that ego tells you that you're the only one going through a certain thing. like I say, ego stands for edging God out. And so when you listen to ego, it tells yourself the world's attacking you. It's you against the world. And when I hear other people's stories, I hear that it's not the case. That regardless of their skin color, regardless of the country they're living in, I'm talking to people from around the world, whether it's Switzerland or India or Pakistan or Asia. Their stories show me that they're fully human at the end of the day, and it further, I would say, cements in me my identity of choosing to be fully human as part of my identity statement. And my color, my skin, and my race are just descriptions of my humanity, but not descriptions of me. And so that to me is important. And each conversation helps me to see that. Like I'll sum it up by saying this as well, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is that my background is system engineering. So I'm a process-oriented person. And so it's always important for me to get, when I look at it, it's like, what's the crux of the problem? Or, what's the core of that system? I'm big on understanding how systems work. And so I came up with my own, what I believe to be description within what I see going on in the world today. It's been throughout history, but more prevalent today because it's tapping back into that. And what I mean by that is this. I think that when people say white people and they say white supremacy, and I think they're saying it within the color. And I think it's, from my experience, it's not so much the color of someone's pigmentation, but it's the identity. I think if you choose white identity, then I believe you believe in that white supremacist mindset. Because like when I chose black identity, I'm gonna choose that my race is superior to yours, because the human race is competitive. It's hard not to just think that whatever your race is, if you identify by your race, you're automatically going to put yourself in competition against someone else. But when I find someone like yourself, and I find individuals who happen to be of the Caucasian background, or genetically they're Caucasians, but they don't identify as white. Either they might not necessarily articulate that. It's in their stories. It's in their conversations. That's what I've learned. That's what I gathered. I see that real time because of how they show up, the energy level, how present they are. And their stories just help give me that rest of that fulfillment, or the analysis that I need to understand them better.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I don't know what it means to be white. It's just like the air you breathe. Like culture is the air you breathe. It's the water if you're a fish.
Right.
If you're a fish, you don't notice water.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But see, that's the distinction from folks who will say that, but not necessarily behave that way. Like I see a lot of political pundits, and that's the part with me that really I find to be interesting, is that folks like to be racial with their behavior, but they never want to define it as such. And that's what I find it interesting, where in the past, it was clear. This is where I stand. I don't care how you feel about it. And, this is what I believe. And it takes what we consider to be white supremacist groups. People who are branded that way, the KKK, neo-Nazis, they're going to say how they feel. But folks who may resonate with that ideology, but not necessarily want to be grouped with them, will say, well, I'm not a racist. And I see a lot of political pundits, but everything that they do behavior-wise shows that they are. Like, for example, if you believe that a group of people's history can just be considered woke and torn away and thrown away as irrelevant, then there is no discussing of, your perspective from that point forward. You're saying my history just doesn't matter because of my skin color. So how can we actually engage? How can we communicate if that's how you see things? I don't think we can even come with that kind of a conversation. So when you say that you don't know what it means to be white, but you don't operate as white either, and I don't know you, but I can tell by what you've written in your book, I can tell by what your conversation you've had with me, the way you live your life, that you live as a fully human being. And I know one of the things I want to definitely do before we get a chance to wrap up, because we get to near the top of the hour, I want you to tell me now, with that context that I laid out for you, who is your target market for your book?
Oh gosh, I would say a couple of things. I think that anyone who has failed, who has lost their career through addiction, incarceration, people who know what it means to be held back by their own limiting belief stories, sort of the garbage stories that they tell themselves. Right? I think people will resonate with it if they sort of suffered in their own leadership and careers, sometimes quietly. I think this book is for them. I also think that it's sort of a cruise missile into sort of the leadership development book market, right? It's intensely personal and vulnerable and honest. And I'm not disparaging any other leadership book, but it is. I hold that leadership springs internally and is manifested externally. So your own personal growth is what actually gets manifested outwardly, right? Leadership is internal. Success meets you at your own level of development. And so your willingness to be fully human, to grow, all of that is, for me, what leadership is. And I think people will embrace the book for that reason. It's an opportunity for them to sort of examine themselves. Most people all of my pre-readers, they've written me back to say, this is how specifically it resonated with me. Right. So in a lot of ways, I was evoking their own stories of growth and struggle. And again, that's the people who grab this book will, they'll go on my journey, but they're also going to connect with their own journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What books do you read to kind of help to feed your mind and keep you on a path of being fully human? Because the world we live in right now, I really believe that truly, if you don't have a plan you're living, you're operating off someone else's plan. There's no middle ground, because everything is about controlling, programming you to produce a certain behavior, whatever media source you're getting your information from. What books do you read to kind of counter that, to keep your mind fresh and keep you focused and in the flow you're on?
Oh, beautiful. That's a good question. I'd also love your recommendations, but I've been rereading Richard Rohr's work. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's a Franciscan priest who runs the Center for Contemplation in New Mexico. And so he's highly contemplative Catholic practitioner and really accessible to any reader. And so, it's an invitation to go internal, to relate with scripture in really, really refreshing ways. So I read his daily reflections. I have my trusted Henry Nouwen, who is a clergyman and Christian philosopher. He's wonderful. I really like Tara Brock's podcasts. She's so gentle, and she really invites just sort of a radical acceptance of yourself and others. So these are a few. Can I bother you for your recommendation?
Oh, it wouldn't be a bother at all. I say with pride, my book that I consider to be my Bible, and I say it's a Bible because I refer to it. It's not a book that I've read once and just put down. It's a book that I refer to on a daily basis, and that's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. And to show you how much he was able to be a human being in that book, I never learned that he was a Mormon until 3 years before he died. So my point is, he's not preaching Mormonism in the book. It's a book that's written from a principled context from a man who may be a Mormon. And that's why I'm saying that's what I see about people who are human beings. There may be descriptions of these societal labels or descriptions of who you are, but not who you are. Another book that's very important to me is in my self-growth and development has been, I would say, Napoleon Hill's work, the 17 Lessons of the Law of Success course. And because that really taught me the importance of value and creating value in the world and understanding what my purpose was and being able to live through my purpose as far as my actions and my behaviors. And so I would say, and then books written by Ralph Waldo Emerson, just understanding human behavior is important. Robert Greenwood, actually forgetting this, The Laws of Human Nature, but I'm forgetting the author's name right now. Forgive me for that. But that's a very important book. So I really want to understand how and why people behave the way they do. And I give you an example of what I mean when I say that. I've been a dog owner as well. Taking and I'm sure you've done this because people who are dog owners do this. You take your dog to the dog park. And when you take your dog to a dog park, you have all these different types of dogs there, a lot of different energy. And your dog will go into the dog park and there's new dogs that he's never experienced before. They look at each other, then they smell each other and they get a sense of each other's energy. And then they decide whether or not they're cool and they start to play, right? And that's a wonderful activity to watch that. And the dogs don't care that the dog may be brown, maybe black, maybe white, maybe fawn. All that's irrelevant to the dog's mind. Doesn't care what breed the dog is. All these things that the categories that we create to separate things. I like the energy. I like how you smell. Let's just go ahead and play while we're here, right? And I'm like, humans can learn so much from animals in that context. Like you talked about anxiety. The anxiety of once you define yourself, if you define yourself by your race or your religion or your sexual orientation, then the first thing you're going to do when you hop on a podcast or a Zoom meeting with a complete stranger who you just met through emails, and you don't know, and profiles, if you've done that much preparation and research, is you're going to look at them differently. And then you all going to do that dance to make sure that you're not trying to be too offensive. How much time do I give them? What's their political perspective? See, you and I have talked for an hour right now. We've talked 20 minutes prior, and I never asked you what your political viewpoint is. I mean, I can assess that through your answers, but it doesn't really matter to me at this point because I don't think that based on who you are, from what I've learned from, read from, and heard from, that you're going to be a person that's going to be to the extreme of humanity. Like you're not going to be voting for some political party that's inhumane. I don't believe that. I would be shocked if that's the case. So that's what I see as the essence, that what I feed my mind has to keep me in that kind of space, keep me on that kind of thinking level of growth, to be a growth-minded individual. That's a long answer I gave you, but I just wanted to kind of get the context of why I read and what I look for to feed my mind.
I love that. You never asked it, but internally I feel deep shades of blue in my political beliefs, but I will say the biggest allies I've ever had in terms of like passing significant bills to lower incarceration rates and create opportunity for people who formerly incarcerated people post-release have internally been read. And they connected with second chances and personal liberty and things like that. So, and I do a lot of work in communities. One of the things I do, I'm on contract with the Judicial Commission on Mental Health in Texas, and that reports to the Supreme Court. And I go to communities across Texas to work with community leaders to identify how people with mental illness are flowing into the criminal justice system and what we can do about that. And that's elected officials, police, probation chiefs, judges, mental health practitioners, community programs, and we all get together and we identify priorities that that community can put into practice to create a different outcome for kids and adults with behavioral health challenges. And so, you know, your political identity disappears in that context, right? When you're rolling up your sleeves with people to solve a common problem.
Excellent. Well, I want to ask you this as we get ready to wrap up. What is one key takeaway that you would want to have our listening audience who's listening to today's podcast and got a chance to hear you for the first time? What is one key takeaway that you would want them to take away from our discussion?
I say in my final chapter, live life like a gift to your soul. Right. So what that means is that you're really interested in what's happening internally with yourself, your emotions. You're willing to learn from them and listen to them, to start to understand your own wisdom and to make decisions that help you to live your life more soulfully. That's my takeaway.
That's beautiful. I love it. Well, why don't you share any contact information where they can get the book, how they can get in touch with you, anything you want to share with our listening audience right now?
Absolutely. Thank you. The book is called The Path of Rocks and Thorns, Leadership Lessons from a Prison Cell. You can find it on Amazon and other book selling outfits. And if you'd like more information about me or want to contact me, you simply go to my website, and that is www.d-degree.com. D-degree, DEGREE.com.
And when we do the replay of this, I'm going to make sure I have that in the lower thirds, your website. And then we'll also put links to your website, Amazon, as well as your any social media accounts that you want to give out as well.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. It's been a really great and just fulfilling conversation with you. And I'm just so grateful you invited me on your show.
Well, thank you, Doug. And I'm grateful for you being on my show. Thank you for your investment of time and energy. And again, I want to thank you for writing the book, because you've gone through a journey and you made a decision. There were several different ways you could have chose to go based on the decision you chose. You chose to go a way of being a servant leader, continue to be a person that wants to help others, give back to society, and live in the energy of love. I call it connecting to the energy of love. And you know, another book I love is The Salesman by Agmandino. And he says in this book, do all things with love, similar to what you quoted earlier, right? And that to me is how you're living your life in that context, because again, you did not let your past define you. You defined your past, and you no longer live in your past, you're living your future. So thank you for being on the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And until next episode of the King Connections podcast, let's all continue to connect with intent and strive to be more fully human. Thank you.